Why don't these smart, crazy people get together and figure out that whole people pooping on the streets thing?
Because they like it.
Do they like it?
Yeah, they want it.
Really?
Yeah, because it makes you feel good, right? You go outside and it's like people are, because what's the alternative would be like locking people up, and of course that would be bad. And so yeah, it makes them feel good.
It makes them feel good that people are just camped out on the streets.
Yeah. Because before that happened, there was forced institutionalization, right? The origin of the current crisis is shutting down the institutions, right? In the 70s, that used to be forced institutionalization of people with those kinds of problems.
Well,
and so it makes
all of it, because a lot of it is drug addiction and just people that just want to just get high all the time.
Yeah.
Would that be forced institutionalization of those folks?
What would have happened to a heroin addict in 1952 who'd been pooping outside the whatever? Like no, they're not going to be there for very long. They're going to be institutionalized. Right, and so like every society has this problem. They have some set of people who just like fundamentally can't function, and every society has some solution to it. And our solution is like basically like complete freedom. But my point is like it's part and parcel, right? It's the same. It's the same thing, right? It's the same
kind of people, the same thinking.
It's this exactly. It's the most creative people, the most open. The psychologists say openness, open to new experiences.
Yeah.
The people most likely to use psychedelics. It's the people most likely to invent new technologies. The people most likely to have new political ideas.
Most likely to be polyamorous.
Most likely to be vegan. Most likely to be communist spies.
Electric cars.
Most likely to be Chinese spies. They're most likely to do it. Most likely to create new music. Most likely to create new art.
Interesting.
It's all the same thing. Like the ground zero for AI is San Francisco. Once again, it's San Francisco, right?
That is.
It's in the heart of the sort of most obviously dysfunctional place on the planet, and yet there it is one more time.
And hyper
and the stuff that's not in San Francisco is in Berkeley.
Wow.
Which is like equally crazy.
More crazy.
Yeah.
Another notch.
Possibly. They have a contest going on the crazy front. It's kind of neck and neck, but yeah.
It's close.
Maybe Berkeley's ahead.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like, so do you need those kind of like dysfunctional places in order to have certain types of divergent thought?
So the way I would put it is that new ideas come from the fringe. And who's on the fringe, right? People who are on the fringe, right? So what attracts somebody to be on the fringe? Like step one is always, am I on the fringe?
Right.
Step two is, what does that mean? Like what form of the fringe, right? But they tend to be on the fringe in all these departments at the same time. And so you're just not going to get the new ideas that you get from people on the fringe. It's a package deal. You're not going to get that without all the other associated craziness. It's all the same thing. That's my theory.
That's not a bad theory.
Yeah.
That's not a bad theory.
And look, I work with quite honestly, I work with a lot of these people. And
of course,
some people would say I am one of them. And so I mean, yeah, this is what they're like. Like they're highly likely to invent AI, and they're also highly likely to end up in the poor guy who got the square guy who got stabbed to death at 2 a.m. And was part of this fringe social scene with the drugs and all the stuff, and it's part and parcel of it's sort of a package deal.
Well, that was like an angry thing where he was mad that this guy took his sister.
But he was in they call
yes.
they call it the lifestyle, right? He was in a specific subculture. Right. In San Francisco,
right?
It's all the alternative living. There's all kinds of stuff. There's group houses. There's a fairly large number of cults.
Really?
Well, there historically, California's been the world leader in cults for a very long time, and I would say that has not stopped, and that continues.
Did you know that the building that I bought for my comedy club initially was owned by a cult?
Fantastic.
It was owned by a cult from West Hollywood called the Buddha Field that migrated out to Austin when they were being investigated by the Cult Awareness Network.
God, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Are they gone or are they still there?
No, they're gone. There's a great documentary on it called Holy Hell.
Yeah.
You should watch it. It's pretty bonkers.
But they're from California.
From California.
The People's Temple, part of this great story of San Francisco is the People's Temple, which became famous for Jim Jones, where they killed everybody with poison Kool-Aid in the jungles in Guyana. That was a San Francisco cult for like a decade, right, before they went to the jungle. And everybody talks about the jungle. Nobody talks about the San Francisco part.
So are there a bunch that are running right now that are successful?
Big time. Yeah, totally.
Really?
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
Do you know?
There's cults all over the place. I know a bunch of them, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how are they run?
Well, some of them are older. There's two sort of groupings. There's sort of 60s cults that are still kind of running.
Like which ones?
There's one called The Family in like Southern California that's still going from the 60s.
Really?
There's a bunch of them, running around. There was a big cult for a long time, sort of cult-ish kind of thing around, what was it? Not Erewhon, but Esalen. So there's still like that whole orbit.
That's the psychedelic groups.
All that stuff, yeah. That's from the 60s. And then there were a bunch of sort of tech cults in the 80s and 90s with names like the Extropians, there were a bunch of these guys. And then more recently, there's a lot of this. You'll hear these terms like rationalist, post-rationalist, effective altruism, existential risk. Long-termism, they sometimes say. And what you find is the people associated with these tend to be very smart. They tend to be very prolific. They tend to do a lot. Many of them are involved in tech, and then they end up with, let's say alternative living arrangements, alternative food and sex configurations, and lots of group-oriented, behavior. And it's like, what's the line, right? What's the line between what's the line between a social group that all lives together, that all has sex together, that all eats the same foods, that is not a cult, that engages in lots of at some point they start to form belief systems that are not compatible with the outside world, and they start to kind of go in their own orbit.
Do they generally have a leader?
There are generally leaders. There is a pattern. I think he talks about it in the book Chaos. There typically is a pattern. It's typically a guy.
Yeah.
There's typically there's a male female dynamic, right, that plays out inside these things that you kind of see over and over again. And so they often end up with more women than men. For mysterious reasons. There's usually some kind of leader. Although, the other thing's happening now is, a lot of modern cults, or kind of quasi cults, there'll be a physical component, but there's also an internet component now, right? And so the ideas will spread online, right? And so there'll kind of be members of the cult, or quasi members of the cult, or quasi members of the quasi cult that'll be, online, and maybe at some point they actually come and physically join up. So, and by the way, let me say, generally I'm pro cult. I'm actually quite pro cult. It's the same reason I'm pro fringe, right? Which is you're going to have, if you're going to have people who are going to be thinking new things, they're going to tend to be these kinds of people. They're going to be people who are on the fringe. They're going to come together in groups. When they come together in groups, they're going to exhibit cult-like characteristics.
What you're saying resonates. Yeah. Everything you're saying makes sense. But how did you get to these conclusions? Like it seems that accepting fringe and accepting the chaos of San Francisco, this is good. This is a part of it. This is how this works. Yeah. This is why it works.
Yeah.
How did you develop that perspective?
Well, it's just, if you take a historical perspective, it's just okay. It's just an easy example. If you like rock music, it just basically modern rock and roll basically came from the Haight-Ashbury in the basically mid to late 60s, and then from Laurel Canyon, which was another one of these sort of cultish environments in the mid to late 60s. And there was specific moments in time in both of these places. And, basically all of the great rock and roll from that era that determined everything that followed basically came out of this. So, do you want that or not?
Right.
If you want it, that's what you get.